Henry Wilson was just taking a walk when two white officers humiliated him, turning an ordinary day into a nightmare, simply because he was black. Unaware that he was the father of a federal judge watching nearby, they mocked him, certain there'd be no consequences. This isn't only a story of cruelty and prejudice. It's a powerful truth that will shatter walls of silence and indifference. An elderly black man named Henry Wilson moves unhurriedly down a bustling city street, blending into the flow of people hurrying past him. He's wearing a well-loved brown jacket that has seen years of wear but is still neat, and on his head rests an old, wide-brimmed hat. From time to time, Henry gently adjusts the hat, using it to shield his eyes from the sun. His skin is dark, and his face is etched with deep lines that tell stories of a long life filled with moments of both joy and hardship. Each line on his face, every crease, reflects years of experience and endurance. There is a sense of history in the way he carries himself, an invisible weight from a lifetime of memories and encounters. Henry walks confidently, taking each step with a slight dignified sway, his right hand resting lightly on a cane. His pace is deliberate, and his movements are calm, as if each step is carefully measured, radiating a quiet pride and strength. His posture reflects a calm dignity, a peaceful resilience honed over decades. But to those around him, he's just another elderly man, strolling along as the world rushes by, oblivious to the depth of his story. He receives barely a glance from the passers-by, people who are too preoccupied with their own busy lives to notice his presence. As Henry continues down the sidewalk, two young white police officers notice him and exchange a look, their faces showing a mix of amusement and disrespect. Their expressions betray a lack of empathy, as if they see him merely as an oddity on their otherwise routine patrol. One officer looks him up and down, eyes resting on the old hat, and then with a mocking laugh calls out, "Hey, Grandpa, maybe it's time to trade that rag in for something more stylish?" He chuckles, nudging his partner. The second officer joins in, smirking and adding, "Yeah, something newer would suit you better. Right now, you look like a character from another century." Their laughter cuts through the air, and in their eyes is clear mockery, mingled with a kind of casual indifference to the impact of their words. They see him as nothing more than a source of quick amusement, certain that their comments will leave no real trace. Henry stops for a moment, looking quietly at each of them, his face composed, though there is a faint trace of pain in his eyes. An old, familiar ache. He doesn't react outwardly, but there's a depth to the way he meets their gaze, as if he's heard words like these many times before, and each time they still manage to leave a small scar. Resisting the urge to respond, he knows that trying to explain himself would only escalate things. Instead, he takes a breath, tries to turn away, hoping to put an end to the encounter. But the officers, feeling emboldened, step in to block his path. They continue with one mocking comment after another, each one growing bolder, more cutting, more disrespectful. Their tone is one of sneering condescension, as though they're certain he's powerless to respond. In their eyes, he's just a harmless old man, unable to stand up to them, let alone challenge their authority. They don't pause for a moment to wonder who he might really be, or what his place in society is. The depth of the man standing before them is invisible to them, as they see only what they want to see. But for Henry, beneath his calm exterior, this encounter is more than a moment of rude behavior. It feels like an open wound, a familiar reminder of the many times he's been treated as less than, simply because of the color of his skin. It's a deeply painful experience, one that goes beyond mere rudeness, striking at the core of a prejudice that has followed him throughout his life, as undeniable as it is unjust. On the bustling city street, people gradually begin to notice the scene unfolding. It starts subtly, with a few glances and puzzled expressions, as the onlookers try to make sense of the officer's treatment of an elderly man. A young woman in a business suit hurrying on her way catches sight of what's happening and pauses, her expression shifting from surprise to outright indignation as she absorbs the disrespect directed at Henry. Her hesitation prompts others to stop as well, and soon a small crowd gathers, their faces showing confusion that quickly turns to silent disapproval. A man standing nearby takes out his phone and starts recording, aiming to capture every detail of the officer's treatment of Henry. Others notice him filming and move in closer, quietly whispering to each other, their voices hushed but their expressions clearly reflecting dismay and resentment toward the officers. The crowd thickens, each newcomer adding to the sense of communal solidarity around Henry. The people exchange glances, silently communicating their shared disbelief at what they're witnessing. Realizing they've drawn attention, the officers begin to subtly change their demeanor, attempting to appear less aggressive. One officer notices the camera trained on them and gives his partner a cautious look, as if warning him to dial back the hostility. But despite the caution, the mockery in their voices lingers. They lower their voices slightly, but the scorn remains evident, seemingly confident that this incident will have no real impact on them. They continue, speaking to Henry with an air of authority, unaware of the growing frustration in the crowd around them. Seeing the support and silent encouragement from those gathering around him, Henry feels a surge of resolve. He decides he will remain silent no longer. He straightens his posture, rising to his full height, and meets the officer's eyes with a look of steady confidence and quiet strength. His expression is calm yet firm, his gaze piercing, and the trace of pain in his eyes now replaced by a determined spark. Without raising his voice, Henry speaks, his tone low but unwavering. "You have no idea who you're talking to." His words are deliberate, carrying the weight of unspoken history and experience. The crowd falls into complete silence, sensing the significance of the moment, and for an instant, the officer's mocking smiles fade. But instead of heeding his words, the officers exchange a smirk, amusement overtaking them again as they laugh at what they perceive as Henry's audacity. One of them, tilting his head mockingly, leans in with a condescending grin and says, "Well, go ahead then, show us who you really are." Henry's son, Mark Wilson, appears on the scene with a resolute look, his stern gaze showing outrage. Having been informed by acquaintances and seen the video spreading online that involved his father, Mark wasted no time coming to the location. Tall, well-dressed, and dressed in an elegant suit, he stands out among the crowd. As a federal judge known for his fairness and principles, he doesn't compromise when it comes to truth and law. Approaching the officers, Mark stops and gives them a firm, penetrating look. His voice is steady but brimming with internal anger. "Care to explain why you dared to speak to my father that way?" he asks, not raising his voice, but his words sound like an order. The officers, not immediately realizing who's in front of them, continue to stand with slight smirks. But suddenly, one of them recognizes Mark, the federal judge who's made several landmark decisions in human rights cases and justice. The officer's face visibly pales, he averts his gaze, and his partner begins to mumble something about a misunderstanding and a simple joke. Mark, unwilling to let them off with empty excuses, steps closer, his gaze cold and stern. Around them, more and more people gather, noticing the presence of the respected judge and openly showing their disapproval of the officers. Supportive exclamations sound from all sides. "This is unacceptable. No one should endure such humiliation." The atmosphere grows tense, and the officers, realizing the gravity of their actions, clearly understand that their careers could be in jeopardy. Yet Mark, holding back his personal emotions, decides not to let the matter rest here. He demands explanations from them, formally and legally, fully aware that the entire incident has been recorded, and his words amount to a declaration of a human rights violation. The officers, who moments before were mocking an elderly man, now stand with downcast eyes, realizing that justice has caught up with them, and it won't allow them to get off easily. The officers are immediately placed under internal investigation, suspended from duty until the inquiry is complete. The video recording of their behavior, captured by bystanders, quickly spreads across social media and becomes a sensation. News outlets pick up the story, and it soon appears on major news websites and television screens. People across the country discuss the video, outraged by the blatant display of bias and disrespect from law enforcement. In news programs, experts and activists discuss issues of racism in the police, systemic prejudice, and the need for reform. Mark, understanding the importance of the moment, decides to make a public statement. Before numerous cameras and microphones, he delivers a speech that becomes a symbol of hope for thousands. His words are measured but firm. He speaks of how respect and equality are not privileges, but rights for everyone. Mark reminds the audience that no one should be subject to humiliation or discrimination because of their skin color or social status. He appeals to society and to authorities, urging them to seek change and justice. Every person, says Mark, no matter how they look, deserves dignity and respect. His speech resonates with many. In comments and discussions, people express support for Henry and Mark, thanking the judge for his courage and principles. The story of Henry and Mark becomes a symbol of the fight for equality, and their resilience serves as an example for everyone who has faced injustice. The officers who humiliated Henry are forced to confront the consequences of their actions. Upon the completion of the investigation, they face charges of ethical violations and abuse of power. Their careers are at risk, and they must answer for their actions before society and the law. Henry and Mark's story not only draws attention to issues of racism and bias, but also sparks a wave of change. In some cities, police conduct rules are reviewed, with additional training in cultural competence and anti-discrimination measures introduced. What began as a single incident on a street grows into a movement for justice and equality.